at the Super Mario Odyssey launch.
Super Mario Odyssey that you have snuck.
Could these be future possibilities of DLC?
No DLC.
No news on a sequel coming anytime soon.
What happened to this? This hype, the anticipation, everyone now seems so eager to move on, but I just can't. Super Mario Odyssey, one of the Switch's flagship titles, seemed primed for a sequel. Selling over 26 million copies with no signs of slowing down, this game should have, in all likelihood, followed the steps of pretty much everything else in the Switch's launch year. Breath of the Wild, sequel. Xenoblade 2, sequel. Splatoon 2, sequel. ARMS, well, they probably didn't want to develop a whole new game for the 10 people who actually wanted that. Point is, every marquee game for this console has gotten some sort of follow-up. If it's not an entirely new game, they certainly got their paid DLC. Except for this one. For this one, Nintendo gave us Balloon World, but that's fine, because we know the sequel has to be coming. It's coming, right? The fabled Mario Odyssey 2, a game teased, hinted, one that would finally fulfill some of the most surprising omissions from its predecessor, hasn't happened. And as we creep closer and closer to that inevitable launch of the next Nintendo console, as we bask in the fresh new vibes of Super Mario Wonder, I'm beginning to wonder myself, are we now past the point of hope for this game? As cheesy as it may sound to say, it really seems too late now for Mario Odyssey 2. And how did we get here? After all of this, could the real reason behind the disappearance of what to pretty much everyone seemed like a sure thing be staring at us right in the face this whole time? Let's examine why Odyssey 2 never happened, and never will. The weird thing I noticed when first looking into this is, on the surface, there would be a lot of reasons to support something like this happening when looking at the content of the game itself. There are a number of teases for DLC in Odyssey. Al Delfino just chilling over here on the game's map, areas like the Cloud and Ruin Kingdom being completely designed, unique, original concepts that go completely unexplored in the game. Why are a ton of the most famous enemies in series history not capturable in this one? Did they leave out content the fans would have wanted more of on purpose? It seems like gaps were being placed to later be filled in. When I try to find out if and why a game got cancelled, there are two quick main things you always gotta look at right away. 1, would it make sense for this game to get additional content? And 2, was the game successful enough to warrant actually getting this content? You can design and lay out the perfect plan all you want, if no one buys the game, you ain't getting the green light to make that sequel. Let's knock out the first one. This shouldn't take too long. We've already established the Switch loves its sequels and DLC. And for good reason.
Money!
But does 3D Mario love that just the same? If you asked fans back in the day, the answer would be a surefire no. Mario 64 was supposed to get a sequel, but it got canned in favor of a brand new experience in Sunshine on the GameCube. 6 years later, we got yet another entirely new experience on the Wii with Mario Galaxy, but this is where a key shift happens. You wouldn't know this just by buying Mario All-Stars, since Nintendo had the bright idea of excluding this game from it, and no, I'm still not over that. But did you know that Mario Galaxy actually got a sequel? We have a precedent set for this type of thing happening before. And if you really want to stretch it, you could even consider the Wii U's 3D World a very similar experience as a follow-up to 3D Land on the 3DS. Not an explicit sequel there, but it shows Nintendo, more modernly, is much more comfortable reusing similar concepts in their 3D Marios. Alright, this is all well and good. We've established the sequel made sense in theory, there's no reason why it couldn't have happened, and many reasons supporting why it would, but did Mario Odyssey perform well enough to warrant sequel or DLC development? Siiroth, are you okay, man? Mario Odyssey is the 5th best-selling game on the Switch. It was the launch year's big holiday blockbuster, it's the most played 3D Mario of all time, of course it's a success. Alright, I get it, I feel ya. came on a little bit strong there, but that's okay, that's okay. Without being too controversial though, I have to bring up something important. Yes, Odyssey is the best-selling 3D Mario, by far, but it's also on Nintendo's second most popular console of all time. To make a long story short, the dilemma that I'm trying to bring up here is Mario Odyssey a huge part of the success of the Switch, or is Mario Odyssey only this popular because of the Switch? Would something else released in the same spot, with the same marketing, with the same plumber on the cover, with a different concept behind it, have done just as well, if not better? Or was there something about Odyssey specifically that went above and beyond? Let's dig a bit deeper. Mario Odyssey isn't unique in it being the best-selling game in its series. Almost every franchise on the Switch has been doing that. With most other series, however, it's pretty obvious that they are a victim of the Switch's success. Mario Odyssey is one of those titles, though, that can be argued as a large catalyst in building this foundation in the first place. Was Mario Odyssey specifically this big, huge system mover? And I think to best understand this answer, it's good to get an example of something that clearly was. Super Mario Bros. For the NES is probably the biggest definition of a system mover of all time. 65% of anyone who had an NES owned this game. People bought this console specifically to play Mario. Mainline Mario's second best-selling game came with New Super Mario Bros. On the DS, but what's likely even more impressive is New Super Wii selling within a million margin of it, despite there being over 50 million less Wiis sold than DS's. Yeah, both games selling an impressive 30 million units, but a much larger percentage of the Wii's player base wanted to pick up this 2D Mario adventure compared to the DS audience. While it didn't sell quite as much, it's hard not to consider it as the much more successful of the two. And right beneath both of them lies our buddy Super Mario Odyssey, the fourth best-selling mainline Mario, pulling in 26 million units with a 20% attach rate. Is that really what Nintendo was looking for here? One thing that's interesting to note is that throughout history, 2D Mario games, when compared to 3D on average, have a much higher attach rate to their consoles, almost always doing better than their 3D counterpart, with probably just one real exception in 3D World. So for Odyssey to do as well as it did as a 3D game itself is pretty unprecedented for the series. You can chalk this overall pattern up to 3D Mario being more niche, less appealing to casual players for not being as simple in concept, whatever the reasons are, but Odyssey defied all of those expectations. I think not considering it a success would be pretty ridiculous. So if there would obviously be a ton of people wanting to play the sequel or even DLC, and it made sense to do it, why have we still not gotten it to this day? To find that answer, looking at the whole Nintendo Switch release calendar broadly, I was getting no luck. But then I thought, this is too general. If DLC was actually supposed to happen, then there had to be a planned time to release it. So I went through Nintendo's whole Switch release timeline to find out exactly what was going on in the company and when it would have been possible to release this, and what I saw was pretty eye-opening. Beginning in 2017, Super Mario Odyssey releases to critical acclaim. Well, maybe not from this guy. If we were gonna get new content, aside from that stupid balloon mode, 2018 maybe could have worked, but it was a tad bit soon. Especially when this is still kind of the launch period where new games are being prioritized to bring people in over optional DLC for fans who already have the Switch. And it's definitely too soon at this point for a sequel. 2019 is probably one of the key spots for this, although they did have other Mario games like Mansion, New Soup, and Mario Maker 2 scattered throughout. So would releasing it here really have been much of a help, or more of just a distraction? 2020, we get 3D All-Stars into early 2021 when the Bowser's Fury DLC gets released in the port of 3D World, so if it came out this year or the year prior, that may have kind of conflicted sales-wise. 2022 seemed like the last chance to many, but this is also when the Mario Kart 8 DLC started. Nintendo maybe didn't want to sell, to what's largely the same fan base, 2 waves of DLC at the same time. And if they had to choose between Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which by the way is the best-selling game in Mario series history, or giving DLC to Odyssey, Mario Kart is clearly gonna take the cake. This still probably wouldn't have stopped an Odyssey sequel though, and we'll get back to that in a minute. 2023, we obviously get Super Mario Wonder, big new 2D Mario, the first for the Switch, and the biggest opening weekend of any Mario game ever. I don't know that it's necessary that we get the 3D Mario sequel in the same year as this. Alright, so looking at this timeline now, we can notice clear spots where DLC or a sequel probably wouldn't have worked. But there's a couple open areas where it realistically could have gone if they really wanted it. But there's an area we haven't looked at yet that likely holds the answer for why neither of these two time periods got an Odyssey 2. Let's examine mid-2018 where a tough decision would have to be made inside Nintendo HQ. Why this time specifically I'll get to in a second. Let's look at two scenarios. Scenario 1, Nintendo devotes a significant amount of their team's effort into crafting the perfect Odyssey sequel. Sure, they've got the engine already made to work with, but this is still a new game we're talking about here. A game that's gonna fix some of the issues people had with the first one. Let's make every moon a meaningful mission, not just 100 of the 999. Imagine all of these big concepts that they just toyed with a little bit now getting completely fleshed out. What types of new ideas could we have seen as well? This realistically could have been a great improvement on the original if the effort was put in. It's probably unrealistic to say the same amount of people or more are gonna buy this game as bought the original, since Odyssey was the first, and it was the launch year holiday game in 2017 for the Switch, probably the most favorable release positioning you can possibly have. But we do have a couple references to see how much carryover there likely would have been. Series like Pokemon have done really well with carryover on the Switch. Scarlet and Violet doing about 88% of Sword and Shield's big numbers. Tears of the Kingdom exploded at launch, nearly 20 million sold in half a year when it took 6 years for Breath of the Wild to get to 30. I wouldn't be surprised to see it creep closer and closer to that number as time goes on. But those series aren't Mario, and different fan bases have different buying habits. Mario fans have a lot more to buy than just one main game and some much smaller spin-offs in comparison. With Mario, it's kind of the opposite. Some of the quote-unquote spin-off games are the best-selling games they have in the series. Mario Kart, Mario Party, and others have taken on their own identities at this point. So when Mario Galaxy sold 12.8 million units on the Wii leading into Galaxy 2's 7.4, just around 58% carryover there, maybe some concern creeps inside the decision makers' minds at Nintendo. Again, at this time, they wouldn't have known about the successful response to sequels of other games like Pokemon and Zelda. This is the data they had to go on, even though we know now in hindsight that an Odyssey 2 would have almost assuredly done larger than this conversion rate. Nintendo back in mid-2018 probably pegs an Odyssey 2 as having a similar kind of drop-off that Galaxy did. But what about scenario 2? You see, this early to mid-2018 range is a different time now for Nintendo. This is when they'd really be able to take in and examine the massive sales success of the Switch, and the early response to Super Mario Odyssey. And if you look at Nintendo just 2-3 years prior to this, there would have been so much more uncertainty surrounding the company. Look, it's easy to say now, as I mentioned, hindsight is 2020, but if you forget, or maybe you're like most people and weren't playing during this Wii U era, I need to stress that during this time, people were talking about Nintendo not making their own consoles anymore. Like have them go the way of Sega and develop their games for other companies' systems. While that still gets thrown around as some sort of what if today, it's perceived as an absurd hypothetical that definitely won't happen anytime soon. Not back then though. The Wii U was their worst performing console ever. How could you expect the Switch to be a sure thing to blow up the way it did? Don't forget Nintendo hedged their bets when the Switch came out a little bit too. The 3DS was still fairly actively getting new games until early 2019. They likely kept developing them until they saw the initial numbers of the new console, cause what if it didn't go that well? My point is they didn't know beforehand how big this console would be, but around this mid-2018 range, the impact is being felt. And someone high up probably decided, look, the Wii U failed primarily due to very poor marketing, not innovating in the way the larger fan base wanted, and a very weak launch lineup that couldn't be salvaged. but there were still many very, very high quality games on this console, and we can pad the Switch's lineup with them by giving the larger install base on this new platform what are essentially to them new games that they never got to play before. We can port over Tropical Freeze, Captain Toad, Xenoblade X, well I guess not that. What about in this scenario, instead of creating a whole new Super Mario Odyssey 2, instead of creating whole waves of DLC for this game, we port over 3D World from the Wii U. We're gonna bring this over, and instead of just porting it, we're gonna create a couple new hours worth of content for it, a significantly smaller amount of effort than would have been required for a whole new Odyssey sequel, but still throwing out a bone for that 5 million or so crossover audience to maybe get them to consider double dipping. After all, 3D Marios don't sell as well as their 2D counterparts. But wait, they don't sell as well as their 2D counterparts, except for this one. It may have been on a much smaller scale. It may have been by a razor thin margin, but 3D World is the one exception to the rule. I'm sure not coincidentally the 3D Mario that's the closest to the 2D Marios in style. In addition to this, let's just straight up rip our classic 3 3D Marios from the past and sell them in a limited time fashion for people who never got a chance to play those before either. If you were Nintendo at this time, which scenario would you choose? You couldn't do both, there were probably not enough team members to feasibly develop all that. And even doing scenario 2 and sprinkling in some smaller bits of DLC in those empty spots that we found still probably wouldn't work. Even if it was possibly conceivable to do that, because you risk oversaturating the 3D Mario market, and interfering with the Mario Kart DLC sales as I mentioned before. I'm being honest, as much as I wanted to see an Odyssey sequel, as much as we all wanted to see this, I can totally understand why Nintendo would choose option 2. And be very comfortable with it. And looking at the numbers today, it's hard to argue that they were wrong in doing that. Super Mario Odyssey, 26.4 million units sold. The 3D World port and 3D All-Stars put together, 21.7 million units. 82% of Mario Odyssey's sales in just those two games alone. So I'll ask you again. Did Super Mario Odyssey sell well enough to warrant a sequel or DLC development? Was it successful? Absolutely, yeah it was. Enough to make it worthwhile to leave 3D World sitting on the Wii U bench and not get a second round of sales from basically copying and pasting this over? For Nintendo, clearly not. Tears of the Kingdom, after the insane start it's had, in all likelihood, is going to outsell Super Mario Odyssey. Looking at the series that we're dealing with here, does that make sense to you? Maybe you can find some way to justify it in your own mind. It doesn't make sense to me. Something may have been off with Odyssey. But there's a bigger reason why this decision was likely made and stuck to this day. Nintendo has been secretly, yet somehow still in front of our very eyes, been playing the long game for the future, so as to not make the same mistake twice. I touched on why the Wii U failed, and it's an even bigger failure when you look at just how many Wiis they sold. Every household had one back then, it felt like. It didn't matter who you were. To put it in perspective, the Switch by the end of its life may even double that. And if you're Nintendo, you can't let something like this happen again. Going from such a massive worldwide success to barely carrying over a small percentage of that audience. Two of the biggest games Nintendo could have put out since this mid-2018 period were Super Mario Odyssey 2 and Mario Kart 9. Neither one of them will release on this system. Nintendo is waiting for the successor to the Switch, whatever that may be called. And while Mario Kart 9 will surely be there at some point, the full story behind that we can discuss another day, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm adamant Odyssey 2 will not. Let's look at the Wii U's launch a bit more in depth. The big problem in the console's early years we've established came in large part due to the severe lack of big games at launch or in the year after that. They had New Super Mario Bros. U, which, while being a fine, simple game on its own with broad appeal, would also at the same time be the fourth one in its series, a direct sequel to a game on the Wii. 3D Mario fans were just coming off of two brand new installments on the Wii. There was just one released on the 3DS, a console more people had already picked up. If you're a casual fan, why are you gonna go out and buy a Wii U just to get another similar experience to what you just had elsewhere? You've already had your fix. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Nintendo isn't going to repeat this same mistake again. They will not do this. There's too much at stake. The Switch 2 is going to fix both of these problems. There will be a brand new 3D Mario game releasing early for this system, but one that's going to be an entirely new experience, something that would have never been seen elsewhere, and the fanbase will be anticipating it even more since we haven't been burnt out with multiple new 3D Mario games all the time now. There will not have been an entirely new one since 2017. They have been saving this game for the future. They've played it smart, satisfying hardcore fans of 3D Mario and Mario Kart in other ways. DLC for the nearly 10-year-old Mario Kart 8, not taking away any potential sales of a Mario Kart 9 on a future Nintendo console. 3D World being a port with bonus content for the Odyssey fan base, 3D All-Stars providing a chance to re-experience similar sandbox-style games for a quick fix. And it isn't available anymore, so it's not competing with anything else on the shelf. And let's say Nintendo's not saving this entirely new huge 3D Mario game for a massive launch of a Switch successor, then what other game is it gonna be? They couldn't save the new 2D Mario because the Switch hadn't gotten one yet. Why are you just gonna rely on a port of New Sup U and a sequel to Mario Maker to get all of those sales when previous consoles have shown 1, it's probably your most popular series, and 2, you don't know what you have sales-wise with the Switch 2 yet. You do know the Switch is successful already, and there's an install base already craving this content. Release your new 2D Mario game here, and then you can follow up Wonder on the Switch successor. Starting the Switch sequel's first 2 years with a brand new 3D Mario unlike anything we've seen before, a brand new Mario Kart, the 10th generation of Pokemon, Metroid Prime 4, and do I even dare utter the words? Start with Odyssey 2 instead? And I think you take a lot more risk at ending up back in the Dark Ages like we were over 10 years ago. What new fans are you bringing in by making Odyssey 2 your marquee launch game? You are capping yourself at the Nintendo Switch level. And yeah, it's a crazy high level, but don't you want to do better? So if this new game is such a sure thing, what's it gonna be like? Well, I don't think Nintendo is gonna have to look too far. Zelda isn't nearly as popular of a name as Mario. Seeing its flagship 3D games be huge drivers to the success of the system must give them hope that if Mario is given a similar treatment, it could have an even bigger impact. Imagine a 3D Mario not just in the sandbox style, but one with the openness of these new Zelda games. Open world, one area seamlessly flowing into the next. It sounds like a pipe dream, but really, what other direction is there at this point that Nintendo could go to make that kind of a statement? And not even that kind, exceed the impact of a Breath of the Wild, of a Tears of the Kingdom. You start the Switch 2 with a game like this, and it's gonna take the world by storm. But hey, watch Nintendo just announce Odyssey 2 and all of this becomes meaningless. It's a funny company sometimes, but I don't think I'm wrong here. Something big is coming for Mario fans, and I'm just happy to be on the ride. But now, once and for all, as much as it pains me to say it, I think it's time we officially say goodbye to Super Mario Odyssey 2. Odyssey was an incredibly fun game, and a concept that I loved, and legitimately a game that, without which, you probably wouldn't know me. The whole hype cycle for Odyssey and reporting on news about it and all that kind of stuff, that's really what got this channel out there. And for that, I'm forever thankful. Odyssey was special. and I'm not gonna forget it.